Welcome back, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Before we get into it, if you find value in what we cover on this channel, I'd be honored if you'd consider subscribing so we can keep building this thing together. And like always, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. All right, it's July 2nd, and I want to walk you through something that broke yesterday that I don't think anyone's framing correctly yet, so let's fix that. While Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were in Doha trying to hold together a fragile 60-day nuclear negotiation window, Israel's defense minister Katz stood in front of cameras and basically said the quiet part out loud. Iran's supreme leader is, in his words, a marked man. He didn't stop there either. He confirmed Israel has already struck Iran twice and made it pretty clear a third strike is on the table if it's deemed necessary. Now, I want to be upfront. This isn't some brand new escalation coming out of nowhere. Back in March, right when the current supreme leader was stepping into the role, Katz posted essentially the same warning. Anyone who picks up the mantle of continuing Iran's campaign against Israel, the US, and its own people becomes a legitimate target. So this is a continuation, not a departure. Same target, different day. Except this time, there's an active peace framework being stitched together in the exact same window. That's the contradiction I want you sitting with as we go through this. A deal is being built in one room, while in another, one of the key players just put a price on the head of the man that deal depends on. Everything I'm walking you through here comes from on-record statements by American and Israeli officials, plus open-source reporting. I'm just pulling it into one coherent picture so you're not getting it in fragments like everyone else's feed is giving you. So how did Iran react? Fast. Within hours, actually. But notice who they aimed it at. Iran's foreign minister didn't fire back at Israel directly. He aimed his statement at Washington instead, essentially accusing the US of failing to control its own ally and warning that any threat against Iranian leadership would get an immediate, forceful response. Here's why that detail matters. This came out just a day after a senior Iranian military commander overseeing operations near the Strait of Hormuz died in what officials called a road accident. A description a lot of analysts aren't exactly taking at face value. Put those two things side by side, and you start to see how Tehran is actually reading this moment, not as a good faith peace process, but as a tense standoff where public statements are doing double duty, part diplomacy, part warning shot. And that's really the tension sitting underneath everything we're about to get into. Iran wants this deal badly, for reasons we'll unpack. But its own rhetoric right now suggests it doesn't fully trust that the deal is going to hold. Let's slow down for a second and walk through the actual sequence, because the timing here is what makes this whole thing so combustible. On July 1st, the US delegation sits down in Doha with Qatar's prime minister to try to stabilize the framework agreed to back on June 17th. A memorandum giving Iran and the US 60 days to hammer out a lasting resolution. Iran's team is technically in the same city, but they're not sitting across from the Americans directly. Everything's being relayed through Qatari and Pakistani intermediaries, which tells you plenty about how much trust exists between the two sides right now. The substance of the talks centers on two things: unfreezing Iranian assets and restoring normal shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. And the numbers here are worth sitting with. In the past day, roughly 35 ships moved through the strait. Before this conflict, that number was closer to 110 a day, so we're talking about a third of normal traffic. One vessel even ran aground, not from an attack, just from how disrupted the shipping lanes have become. Getting that number back up toward 110 is essentially the entire point of what's being negotiated. Meanwhile, in Washington, the president is telling reporters the talks are going well, that Iran's made real progress. And on that exact same day, not the day before, not the day after, Katz is standing at a memorial ceremony announcing that the supreme leader is a marked target and that a third strike is on the table. Nobody in the US administration publicly responded to that. Not a rebuttal, not a clarification, nothing. So here's the picture I want you holding on to. A peace framework carefully being assembled in Doha. At the same time, a public target designation is being issued against the one person that framework depends on, coming from Washington's closest partner in the region. The US is trying to hold this whole thing together, while the ally it needs to restrain just sent its own message straight to Tehran. To really understand what this threat means in practice, you need to understand who's on the receiving end of it, and more importantly, where he actually is. The current supreme leader took over in March, stepping into the role after the strike that killed his father. On paper, he's now the most powerful figure in the Iranian government. But there are well-documented cracks in that command structure, and a growing body of credible reporting suggests IRGC hardliners are the ones actually running day-to-day security behind the scenes. Here's something that should stop you in your tracks. His very first address as supreme leader wasn't delivered by him. It was read aloud by a television presenter. No video, no audio, no image of the man himself. And it hasn't gotten better. State media has resorted to running old archival footage, and in some cases, AI-generated images, just to have something to put on screen. The Iranian public hasn't seen their own supreme leader in any live or verifiable form in over 4 months. Sit with that for a second. A government asking its citizens to simply trust that their leader is alive, well, and in command, while showing them nothing but recycled footage and computer-generated substitutes as proof. And here's where the intelligence picture fills in the gaps. According to American and Israeli security officials, he was wounded, cut off from communication, and largely unresponsive in the immediate aftermath of the strike that killed his father back in February. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence testified to Congress that he was very seriously wounded, and that the decision-making process inside Iranian leadership right now is, in her own words, unclear. The U.S. ambassador to the UN has said the injury is actively slowing the peace talks. Iran's own ambassador to Cyprus told reporters he suffered injuries to his legs, arms, and hands in that same strike, and more recent reporting points to ongoing complications, possibly including a prosthetic limb and multiple surgeries. Iran's official position? A minor ankle injury, nothing more, which notably is roughly the same tone they took with that military commander's death on the highway. So here's the question a lot of you are probably already asking. If the guy supposedly running the country is this hidden, this compromised, this hard to even confirm is functional, how is Iran still showing up in Doha as a serious negotiating partner at all? Fair question. The honest answer is that Iran's leverage right now has almost nothing to do with the supreme leader's personal health or visibility. It's structural. The Strait of Hormuz doesn't need him conscious to remain one of the most consequential choke points on Earth. The naval mines, the fast attack boats, the shore-based missile batteries, the drone stockpiles, none of that hardware needs a healthy leader in front of a camera to be dangerous. What it needs is a command layer capable of authorizing its use. And even in its degraded state, that layer still technically exists inside the IRGC's more distributed structure. With the senior commanders who died alongside his father now gone from the chain of command, Iran's military has effectively shifted to what analysts are calling a mosaic defense. Authority pushed down to local commanders, because the centralized structure at the top no longer has the confidence or, frankly, the capacity to run operations the way it used to, which puts us in a genuinely strange spot. The man theoretically making the highest stakes decision in this entire conflict may be running his own government through a courier network because he doesn't trust replacing it with something as simple as a phone call. That's the most dangerous version of this story. A regime too fractured to project strength publicly, but still fully capable of triggering a global economic crisis through a waterway that roughly a fifth of the world's daily energy supply passes through. Now, to really grasp what Israel's latest threat means in practical terms, we need to go back and look at exactly how the first strike, the one that killed his father, actually came together. Because the same intelligence machine that built that operation is the one being pointed at the sun right now. February 28th, 2026. The operation was originally planned to launch at night, under cover of darkness. But in the final hours before the strike window, intelligence came in, reportedly through CIA channels, indicating Iran's top military and civilian leadership were all converging on a single residential compound in central Tehran that Saturday morning. Too significant an opportunity to pass up, so the plan shifted. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs later described it publicly as a daylight strike, triggered by that convergence event, carried out by the Israeli military and enabled by U.S. intelligence. But that trigger moment didn't happen by accident. It was the product of years of quiet groundwork. Israeli intelligence had reportedly penetrated Iran's own domestic traffic camera network, the same surveillance system Iran uses internally to monitor and identify protesters and regime critics. In effect, Israel turned Iran's own surveillance state against its own leadership. One Israeli intelligence official put it simply, they knew Tehran as well as they know their own capital. And when you know a place that intimately, you notice the one thing that doesn't fit the pattern. From there, Israeli signals intelligence units, widely regarded as among the most capable in the world, ran years of accumulated movement data through AI-assisted pattern recognition. They were building what's known in intelligence circles as a pattern of life, travel habits, security rotation schedules, meeting frequency, preferred routes, and crucially, the gaps in protective coverage that occur during movement between locations. When that data pointed to a high-probability convergence event, a human intelligence source on the ground is believed to have provided final confirmation. The strike happened in daylight, deliberately catching him off guard since he'd assumed any attack would come under cover of night. His son watched all of this unfold, and that, more than anything else, explains why the security protecting him now is the most extreme protective posture the Islamic Republic has ever built around a single individual. So what does protecting him actually look like now? It's extreme, and it's deliberate. Officials summoned to meet with him are moved through blacked-out vehicles for the final leg of the journey. From there, they're brought in blindfolded through a tunnel system, and the whole protocol is built around one core principle. No single official, no matter how senior, should be able to piece together his actual location from their own experience getting there. Everyone only knows their own small segment of the route, and those segments get changed over time. The tunnel network itself reportedly stretches across roughly 5 kilometers underneath Tehran, running beneath schools, hospitals, mosques, and heavily populated residential neighborhoods. This isn't improvised. It reflects a doctrine the IRGC has spent decades refining, deliberately embedding critical military infrastructure underneath civilian life. Any potential strike on that tunnel system now comes with an enormously complex collateral damage calculation, and that complexity is the entire point. It's not a side effect of the design, it is the design. The civilian population above becomes, functionally, a layer of protection for the man below. So how would you even approach targeting someone inside a structure built specifically to prevent that? Speaking purely in terms of how military strategists think through this kind of problem, you don't go looking for the hidden individual directly. You map the network of people and systems around him and start removing pieces of that network until a pattern emerges. It's the same basic approach that eventually led to locating Osama bin Laden, not by finding him directly, but by tracing the courier network connecting him to the outside world. At scale, that means combining dozens of different data streams, traffic cameras, internal communications, movement patterns of officials known to have access to him, supply schedules for an underground facility, power consumption patterns, even communication dead zones that hint at a signal-isolated bunker. Individually, none of that tells you much, but run through AI-assisted pattern recognition over weeks of collection, it starts adding up to something much clearer. And that's the unsettling part. The more data gathered about everyone trying to reach him, the more visible he becomes, even while staying completely hidden himself. That's the machine currently running, and that's what Israel's latest public statement actually represents, operationally. Before we tie all of this together, let's take a quick detour, because while all of this was unfolding in the Middle East, Russia and Ukraine were trading some of the heaviest strikes we've seen from either side in quite a while. Russia launched what analysts are calling one of its largest overnight strike packages of the year against Kyiv, a mix of cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and a large wave of jet-propelled drones. Confirmed impacts hit industrial areas in the northern part of the city, along with the design bureau connected to vehicle and machinery manufacturing. Ukraine, for its part, kept up the pressure the other way, specifically targeting Crimea, where power outages are now serious enough to make Russian military planners visibly uneasy. Russia has treated Crimea as a fortified stronghold since taking it in 2014, but over the past roughly 40 days, a sustained drone campaign has been steadily cutting the logistical lifelines, keeping that stronghold functioning. A major power substation going dark isn't just an infrastructure inconvenience, it's a signal. It suggests the protective buffer around Crimea is being squeezed from the outside in, and Russia's ability to sustain operations from the peninsula is degrading faster than it can be patched with rail and road logistics alone. In other words, Crimea is becoming increasingly isolated, and Russia may soon be forced to choose between pouring more resources into holding a position that's growing more expensive by the week, or accepting a strategic pullback that would mark one of the most significant shifts in this war in over 2 years. Okay, let's pull all of this together, because individually these are just headlines, but together they form a much bigger picture that almost nobody else is connecting. Iran signed onto that memorandum of understanding with the US on June 17th, in exchange for halting uranium enrichment, surrendering its existing stockpile, capping missile ranges, and accepting new terms around the Strait of Hormuz. Iran gets sanctions relief, access to roughly $25 billion in frozen assets, and the ability to sell oil oil on the open market again. That's the deal currently on the table in Doha. But here's what almost nobody is talking about. Why Iran needs this deal to close and why it needs it fast. They need it before the Kurdish insurgency in the western provinces grows further. They need it before resistance activity in Tehran, Isfahan, and Tabriz becomes loud enough to produce visible instability at home. And most of all, they need it before their own supreme leader, a man who hasn't been seen in public in 4 months, becomes a full-blown credibility crisis that state media simply can't paper over anymore with old footage and AI-generated stand-ins. And there's a third layer to this that gets almost zero coverage. That 60-day negotiating window was sold to the Iranian public as a position of strength. Iran coming to the table on its own terms, extracting concessions from a superpower. But every week that passes without a visible, functioning supreme leader to back up that narrative chips away at the story the regime is telling its own people. Authoritarian systems don't just need actual strength, they need the appearance of it. And when that appearance starts to crack, the gap between what citizens are told and what they can plainly see for themselves starts producing real political consequences, ones no amount of media management can fully contain. That gap is widening inside Iran right now, in real time. The unrest in the Kurdish regions is real. The resistance activity in multiple major cities is documented. A senior naval commander died under circumstances the regime insists nobody should question. And the supreme leader hasn't been seen in public in 4 months. Individually, the regime can manage any one of these, but all of them happening simultaneously during the exact 60-day window the whole world is watching. That's a compound pressure no regime built the way this one is can easily absorb. And that, more than the military's fractured command structure, might be the single biggest vulnerability this regime is facing right now. A legitimacy gap built around an invisible leader and a population increasingly aware something is being hidden from them. So here's the question I want to leave you with, because I genuinely don't think anyone has a clean answer to it right now. Not in Washington, not in Jerusalem, not in Doha. If Israel does go through with a third strike, and the supreme leader is eliminated or seriously incapacitated before this 60-day window closes, does that collapse the entire deal and send everyone back to open conflict? Or counterintuitively, does removing the one figure most committed to a hardline position actually clear the way for a faster settlement? Both scenarios are plausible, and both clocks, the diplomatic one and the intelligence one, are running at the same time, right now, as we speak. So I want to hear from you. Do you think a third strike happens before the 60 days are up? Or does Iran manage to close this deal before Israel's intelligence picture gets clear enough to act? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them. If this kind of deep, connect-the-dots breakdown is valuable to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one, because this 60-day window is going to move fast. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. This has been the Professor Jiang Report, and I'll see you in the next one.